And we're back. Let's see if I remember how to do this. Three and a two and a.
And now your feature presentation.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside. He's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter removed.
Removed?
He's been banned. It's been a while, everyone. I
What?
almost had it. I'm back, baby.
Let's
Eric-
ride, Matt. Let's ride.
His name is Eric Marchand. How are you?
Matt, I'm
I'm
good.
a little rusty,
good.
as you can tell.
To quote the great one, Stained, it's been a while.
Yes, I don't turn my back on family, so I am back. Yeah, it has been a while. I will go more into detail of why that was, but people who follow me on, Twitter and know me probably know why I had to take some time off. But our last review was probably Scream six, yeah.
Yep.
And then which was kind of, I don't know if anyone could tell, but I was in a rough headspace even when we were recording that and a couple of reviews we did around that time. But I am refreshed. I am feeling much better mentally and physically. And after some time off, I am very excited to be back and doing this again. I missed talking movies with you. I missed going to the movies. And what better way to make my return than the return of Dominic Toretto and the Fast family. Fast X is out, and like I said, you can't turn your back on family. I can't turn my back on family. Eric, you are my family. I am so excited to be back to talk about Louis Leterrier's Fast 10. Woo! Yeah, I will get better at the intro, but anyways, yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait to talk about this. I'll talk about everything else in the main show. Eric and I will be back with probably bi-weekly episodes of the main show. We'll be back with reviews as often as we want to review movies. That's kind of how we're going to approach it now. It might be every week. It might be just the movies that we want to hit up. I'm going to take it slow at first, but I do want to talk to Eric about Blackberry. I do want to talk to Eric about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I still have other movies to catch up with, like Beau is Afraid and Dungeons and Dragons and other things like that. That'll be probably watching when they come out on VOD. But today, it's Fast 10. And Eric, Fast 10 your seatbelts because we're about to start. How are
What a
you
missed
doing now?
what a missed opportunity that is, not to have the title Fast 10, fasten your seatbelts. I'm good, Matt. It was fun. It was strange because the promo screening was at the Queensway Cineplex, which is usually,
My home theater now.
yeah, and a little bit out of the way for people that are in the downtown core. So getting out there was kind of interesting. But on top of that, it
Super
was also,
easy for me, like a 15-minute drive. It's great.
well,
I almost want
yeah,
all
okay, we
theaters.
get it.
That
Everything's
was
working for you.
no, it was one of the reasons though of like, okay, maybe this will be the one where I go to a screening and I commit to doing a review for,
Yeah.
because it was a little bit easier to get to. My wife Nevis came with me. Like it was only a 15-minute drive, and this is all shit no one cares about. If you're joining us for the first time, this is what we are. So we'll get to the
Surprise.
movie in a second. Okay, there's time codes.
I
You
can see the
skip all
one
this shit.
YouTube review already commenting and just being like, "What the hell is
Putting
this
when
shit?"
it starts if I don't put time codes. Yeah. But it was out in Etobicoke, which is weird. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was fun because, like, it was nice seeing just you and Nevis there, but also, talking beforehand. You had some salty nuggets, so
I
it was a
did.
good night. It was a
Impossible
good night.
nuggets. Yeah.
Yeah.
With all of these screenings, they are always at a weird time where you don't have enough time to cook dinner. So you have to resort to theater food. So I got some impossible chicken nuggets, so some fake chicken nuggets and some French fries, saltiest things I've ever had in my life. But it's stuff like that. It's the little things, Eric. And like, we'll talk. Guardians was the first movie, not the first movie, but the first movie I went back and I was in a really good headspace. And it reminded me of that. I love, not that Guardians is the best movie of all time, but it hit me at the right time where I was like in a weird headspace where I wasn't going to the movies much, but it was something I really wanted to see. And the MCU being in a spot where I'm kind of mixed on it, but then James Gunn with Guardians just kind of really kind of nailed what I was looking for at a very specific time in my life, and it made me quite emotional. But then it made me really have that urge to be excited about movies again, which is weird, because I wasn't for a little while. So like something like Fast 10, which just kind of crept up on me because I haven't been focusing on film and movies. Not, I shouldn't even call this a film, but or movie or something.
An
I've been
art
excited for,
installation.
yeah, I'm excited for moving pictures on a screen. Um,
The pictures.
so you know, and then seeing Blackberry, which then hit me at the right time, and then seeing Fast 10, I think this is such a stupid, silly franchise. But it just was at the right time of my life for it. That's what I needed. I just needed to watch something super dumb, explode on screen, be fun and awful at the same time. And then that's kind of, you know, how I felt after this movie. So before we get into it and, you know, elaborate on that, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're returning because I haven't been around and Eric's been holding down the fort doing some interviews, you guys should go check those out on the Untitled
I
Movie
thought you
Podcast
said
channel.
fart there for a second.
Holding down, Eric's holding in a fart. We're trying something different now where we're going to start releasing our reviews on the release date. So Fast 10 is out in theaters now. You guys can go see it. The intro will be much shorter than this. Usually it's just because we haven't done this in a while where we're kind of catching up beforehand. But Eric and I want to do a thing where we're doing very brief kind of, do we recommend the movie, spoiler free? I know, super original. No podcasts or other YouTube channels ever do this.
Cutting edge.
Uh, give you a quick, should you go see this movie? Did we like it? Did we not like it? And then immediately go into, you know, full blown analysis of the movie with all spoilers, because I feel like Eric and I really liked our discussions on the HBO Last of Us show. And we always love the spoiler cast that we do. And we feel like we get like a much better conversation when we're not tiptoeing around certain details and things like that. And I feel like when people consume podcasts and especially movies about podcasts, I feel like they're either coming in for a very quick, should I go see this movie? Or they're coming in for, I saw this movie and I want to hear people talk about it in detail, right? Like with the same spoilers and things that happened, instead of us going, well, there's a really cool part in the third act, but you can't talk about it. And like, that's not saying that we won't do that moving forward for certain really big movies that have like an embargo beforehand, like, but we'll try to keep those short, and short for us is, we say 10-15 minutes and it ends up being a
2 hours
8-minute
later.
intro. Yeah, 2 hours later. So who knows, but moving forward, we're going to try this something new. We're not really going to put out things early unless it's something like really, really big, because then that way I feel like we can have a better conversation about it. Not saying that Fast isn't really, really big, but
No, we're saving those for movies like Book Club, The Next Chapter,
yeah,
you know, those
yeah.
big ones.
Yeah, exactly. But without further ado, Eric, I will throw it over to you first. Your quick reaction to Fast 10, part 1 of 3.
I think that sums it up perfectly. It's you know, meathead cinema at its most extreme. And if you're a fan of the franchise, you will continue to buy into the cult of family, which is very representative of this movie in particular. I think Vin Diesel at this point realizes that this is his, you know, bread and butter, and he does not want to let go. Hence, announcing a third film on the Rome, you know, premiere red carpet.
I'm pretty sure
And
Universal didn't even know about that.
yeah, it's like, wait, what? And so when you're watching the movie, if you get a joy of that, or have a connection to the characters or the performances in quotations, you'll probably enjoy this. But if you're somebody that's more of a casual viewer, I think that this is going to really test your patience, especially not even with the kind of very stiff, archaic kind of dialogue and melodrama, but more so with the action. I think you know, these movies have kind of shifted gears, so to speak, in a pun, where, you know, since 5 they've really upped their game with the action set piece. But at the same time, a lot of these movies do tend to blur together, and it's really hard to kind of pick anything out from this specific ride that really stands out, other than a flaming bomb that's rolling down the streets of Rome. And really, the only reason I remembered that is because I kept thinking this is weird, like corporate synergy and unintentional marketing for Oppenheimer in a
Sure.
way. And so and that's what and also because, I mean, I mentioned book club, but book club, the next chapter also takes place in Italy, and they're in some of the same spots that kind of big sequence is taking place. So I was laughing at that
Same
as
universe,
well.
right?
Um, the most, and this is going against the movie in terms of what it's doing, because you're not, I think it's in on the joke at times, but there are moments where it is very sincere, and that's actually when it's best or funniest. But I don't know if that's intentionally what Vin Diesel and the
I never
auteur
know.
Louis Leterrier really want. But when Vin is trying to actually be a dad to little B, little
So
Brian,
funny.
it is amazing. It's like watching Tommy Wiseau and Neil Breen interact with people, and it just feels like Vin Diesel, the further he's become a movie star, the less sort of attached to reality he's become. And those scenes are very funny because it does feel like it's a robot sort of interpreting what fatherhood is,
Yeah.
an AI, if you will.
Yeah. The first movie written by AI, but it's just Vin Diesel. Yeah, I kind of completely agree with you. So I'm assuming you're recommending it if you're a fan of the franchise, and if you're not at this point, you never will be.
No,
Is
exactly. It's impenetrable.
yeah.
And that's what that,
Yeah.
and again, that's not a bad thing. It's just that it's, I think
10 movies in, no, yeah.
I think Fast 5 was the movie that not only changed the direction, as I already mentioned, but it invited more people in, because before that it was still kind of known as this kind of grotty, exploitative, TNA cars and, tank
Mhm.
tops and things like that. But then when it became kind of a faux Mission Impossible sort of style film, I think that brought in a wider audience. But now it's gone to the point where, they've gone to space, they've jumped the shark in so many ways
Oh,
that you
10
can they,
times, yeah.
yeah, that you can only do so much with this franchise at this point, that it does feel exhausting after a while.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the exact same page where I enjoyed the shit out of this movie. I laughed probably more than anyone in that entire theater. I laughed nonstop at every sincere piece of dialogue delivered by every character. I thought, I'm with you where whenever it's trying to be funny is probably where it's least enjoyable. The action sequences are fun, but I also fun but forgettable in the sense where I'm with you where it's kind of in one eyeball and out the other. When you think about these movies as a whole or this saga as a whole, you'll remember certain ones, but you won't remember what movies they're from. And this kind of continues that where you'll go, okay, there's the flaming ball one, but then by Fast 10 3, are we going to go, was that in the first Fast 10 or the second one? Was that in Fast 9? And then and that's kind of what this franchise is and has become. And I love every second of it. Like, it's so stupid. It's so awful. It gets so ridiculous where in any other franchise, if they retconned as much shit um as they do in this saga or this franchise, you'd roll your eyes or you'd go like, come on. And like, but that's where I'm cheering when I watch these movies. Every time they retcon something, I'm like, absolutely, he was standing right outside the frame the whole time. That's absolutely amazing, and yes, please do more of that. When every time someone walks in is like, I'm actually the daughter or son or cousin or hairdresser of this person, you're like, fuck yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. And then like, it's that kind of stuff where it goes so far off the deep end where it comes out on the other side and you're like, I am down. Just go as stupid as possible. Make this as melodramatic as possible. I said this to you when we were sitting there, and I tweeted it too, where it reminds me of like a live action Saturday morning cartoon soap opera, right? Like it's that thing where you'd go to the store and you would see the Ninja Turtle toy and there'd be like, or the Batman toy where, it's some ridiculous costume you've never seen in the TV show, or the Ninja Turtles are playing volleyball or some bullshit. And you're like, that's not from the show, but it works because it's like an action figure of the cartoon, where I feel like this is like a live action adaptation of a cartoon's action figures toys. And it's just like,
But those toys have
it's
more chemistry
incredible.
than
And
Vin
it's
Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez.
sure. Oh yeah, there's stuff like that just like, and there's problems with this movie even if you're a fan of Fast, where I think there's so much good and it's so ridiculous. And but then there's also times where they cut to characters and they don't give them much to do or anything like that. And like it is very much set up for the next two movies, and things like that. But I had an absolute blast watching it. I feel like at this point, you kind of know what you're getting into. I know people have had some criticisms of, Fast 8 and 9.
See,
Yeah,
you're
Fate of the
doing it. It's
Furious. And
happening already
yeah,
where
see,
it all
I know.
blurs.
Where I'm like 7 they liked or not. I forget. But like to
Seven
me,
was
they
the
all,
one with which was when Paul Walker passed
yes,
away
send
during the
off.
making
Yes.
off, and it was
Yeah.
the send off. And then like even with where characters come and go, you think like, oh, what was the one with like the runway? And it's like that was 6, right? So that's the
Yeah.
one where
Yeah.
this
And that's
character
exactly what this
dies,
franchise
or
is. And
yeah.
you just gotta buy into that and be okay with it, and I am okay with it. Like, I feel like every Fast and Furious movie at this point, after Fast 5, I'm like, "Yep, more Fast and Furious." Like, that's the end of your criticism. It's just like, there are moments and certain moments of dialogue or character reveals or whatever that you'll pop for or whatever, but as the stupider it gets, which isn't a word, but the better. And then quickly, before we go into spoiler stuff, which we'll talk about this character more, but Dante Reyes from Jason Momoa, probably the best villain in Fast and Furious history. He's doing his version of the Joker, and it is incredible. He is so unhinged and perfect. Like right when they cast Momoa for this, you're just like, oh, that's perfect. He absolutely should have already been in 10 of these movies. Um, but so when he shows up and he just gives this absolutely unhinged Joker-esque performance with certain sequences where I'm like, what the fuck are they even doing? Like, it just seems like what Tom Hardy was trying to do with Venom, where someone was just like, hey, Jason, do whatever the fuck you want and make it as weird, not even weird, but just eccentric as you would want it. Just say the most ridiculous shit or do whatever you want and we'll put it in. Like none of it felt scripted to the point of just being like, Momoa, just be a freak, dude. And then he went off and was a freak. And like it's so stupid and so over the top and so funny. And his performance, I think, is legitimately good for what this movie is. Um, Not saying he's gonna get an Oscar nomination or anything. But
God, could you
he's
imagine?
he's so perfect in this movie that you have to say like he's the star of the thing, and he is the thing you will remember, right? Like he is the thing that you will take away from this movie and some of the horrible sequences of Dom and his son. And like so
I
anyways,
love
I
you,
think you
little
should go
boy.
see it. Little B, which doesn't make any sense. We'll get into all of that. So anyways, I said a quick intro and we're already 20 minutes in. We probably could wrap now, but like I definitely think you should see the movie if you like these movies, which is the most lazy kind of criticism ever.
But there's a truth to
And
that,
if
I
you
think.
haven't,
And a
yeah.
valid, like it's
So
valid to say
and you were
like,
going to see it anyway, so you're probably going to stick around
yeah.
for the spoiler part, because if you're listening to this, it's not like, "Well, I don't know if I should watch Fast 10." It's just like, okay, was it better than 8 and 9? I personally liked it more, I think, than 8 and 9, but maybe that's recency bias and maybe because I like Momoa so much.
How much
And I
can you
think a lot of
remember
people who are,
though in 8 and 9?
that's a great point. That's what I mean. So I think I will remember Momoa more than I remember anything in 8 and 9. Does that make sense? Like bringing
It
Cypher
does,
back again or having like, whatever,
with a
like,
normal haircut.
again, I don't remember much from 8 and 9 or Hobbs and Shaw, right? So like it's I think that's why I'm riding a bit of a high where I I really liked Momoa so much in this that yeah, the action feels kind of after 6, 7, 8, they all kind of blend together. And this doesn't change that, and 9 too. The thing I remember most about 9 is that Universal logo, the 80s Universal logo at the beginning, and just bursting out laughing right away. So I'm like, that's incredible. Why is this movie starting with that? And then there's that flashback sequences, and I like those flashback sequences, but like, um, that's what I remember from that movie, where it's like looks like it's shot on film and stuff like that. I'm like, this is inspired. This franchise is incredible. So, anyways, I think you should go see it. If you're listening and you're 20 minutes in already, you probably have seen it already. So we'll cut it there and we'll move on to the spoiler part. So, Eric, now with the we don't have to pump the brakes anymore. We can go. We just
Well,
fucking crank up the
this
nos
is
and
a
talk about
literal
whatever we
spoiler
want.
cast, and there are spoilers in these cars, so it's going to be
I like
exciting
that.
to talk about that. So
Um, so I don't know where the hell to start, but like, when you have Dante talking to the dead guys, I was like, Jesus Christ, what is this? And like, there's so many unhinged moments from Jason Momoa, the Super Mario Brothers thing.
here we go.
Just you can name like a million different things. Um, where do I else do I want to start? I don't even know where the hell to start, but like John Cena fucking exploding, he's gonna come back in part 3. You have Giselle showing up at the end. You have the Rock showing up in the post-credit scene. Those are just throwing out the things. I don't know,
Brie
where do you want
Larson
to
is
start where
Mr.
we have,
Nobody's daughter.
right. It's stuff
Going
like
back,
that, which is
I was just going to say, going back to the Momoa thing, because I saw a video of him talking about, like, I think it was maybe his letterbox, where he was talking about some of his favorite movies, 4 of his favorite films. And one of them he mentioned was The Shining, and that Jack Nicholson is his favorite actor. And that scene that you're referencing with the 2 dead bodies and he's talking to them is
yeah.
very much out of Tim Burton's Batman 89, when the Joker shocks
Yeah.
that one mobster, and then when the other mobsters leaves, he has that conversation with the fried baddie, and he's like, kill
That's
them
a
all?
great point.
You're one mean son of a bitch. And even when he is taking that bomb and controlling it, and he talks to the guys that that are working for him now, because he's forced them into doing so, because he's captured family members,
Kidnapped their families.
yeah, he
A
says,
lot
like,
of weird dark shit that is weirdly comedic.
send it to the Vatican. Okay, you guys are going to hell, and he is
Yeah.
having such a good time that when you're watching this movie, like you said in our spoiler-free review, the thing that you take away from it is this performance kind of being introduced into this world. And it is very similar to Fast Five in that way, that one of the big highlights of that movie was when The Rock was introduced, as Hobbs, and kind of stole the show in a lot of ways. So you're getting, these 2 characters at these 2 different points in the franchise, reigniting some interest in something that's been going for so long. But that's also where I think some of the problems comes into play, because you have a film that is directly referencing 5, to the point where they're using archival footage to retcon what happened in that 5th movie, but they're still using the footage. 2 reasons why that is a problem, or at least why I think it kind of hurts this movie. One, Fast Five is a better film than Fast X, in my opinion. And so you're just thinking about how good that movie is in comparison. So when you're comparing the 2, the second thing that I think is a little weird is that you see Paul Walker in some of those scenes as Brian, and in the present day sequences, the movie that was made last year, there's really no reference to Brian at all in this movie, and
and you
they're
think
just
he would
flat
have
out
an equal
ignoring
part
him.
even. Yeah, and with Dante wanting revenge, you'd think he'd also want revenge on Brian, right? Because like
Yes.
I know it's Vin who lets Brian drive away, and then he even the reveal at the end with Hobbs, he was the guy who actually killed. It's very silly again, like a lot of you have to throw um reason out the window in when you're watching these movies, because again, even with the Brian stuff, naming his son little B makes absolutely no sense. I
It should
love
have
you,
been
dude, but
Paul.
I don't think if I had a even then, I guess like that's meta enough where in in the universe, it wouldn't be weird for him to name the kid Paul, but we have that as a viewer knowing, like, again, that makes more sense. I agree with you, than him naming him Brian. Because say I have a kid right now, Eric. No offense, I love you. I'm not naming my kid Eric. That's weird. Like,
But that would also
I'm
be
not doing
strange
it.
because, I mean, like I think it'd be a harder comparison. It would be like if we played characters on like a TV show or something like that, and then you named your
But
kid
you got to
after the character I played on a show instead of
no, because
me.
in the universe, he's naming it after his actual friend. Like, he's naming
Right.
Brian, right? So like it is that one to one, because in the
But
universe,
he's
it's his
not,
best friend.
and he's not dead. Like that's that
That's what I
Like
mean.
Brian.
Like, you're
Yeah,
alive. Like, if you died and you're my best friend, you go, okay, I might want to honor you. I'm going to name one of my sons Eric because he was my best friend and I miss him. And, I want to honor his legacy that way. But in that universe, he's not dead, which therefore, when you're watching the movie, like you said, every time Mia is around
which is
they've
also
done this
bizarre
the last
because
couple
she's looking
movies.
after little B at one point before, because everybody else is
Yeah.
in Rome and
And
kind
where's
of,
Brian?
shit.
Just out grocery shopping
Yeah,
with
well,
all
it's
this
like
stuff happening?
they also have children, right? So you're thinking to yourself,
Yeah.
wait, so Mia is babysitting Brian, but doesn't she have her own family to look
So that's what
after?
I mean by you kind of just have to add that to all of the ridiculousness of these movies and go, they wanted to give Brian the character a nice send off because the real actor passed away and they didn't want to kill him off because they felt like maybe it would be tasteless or whatever, or not honoring him, so they just let him walk off into the sunset and he doesn't want a part of this anymore. He's not a part of this. But sometimes you don't have a choice in that, right? When
Yeah.
you think of this, with all of this shit that's happening to your sister, to your best friend, to your family, I'm using air quotes, everyone, there was no reason why Brian wouldn't have a phone call with Dom, why he wouldn't have a phone call with his sister. And maybe this happens off camera, but they can't have it because, and like, you don't want to use digital AI stuff and recreations with his brothers. Like, that feels icky, even though I feel like they probably will by the end of this trilogy that they're doing with the last thing. So I'm with you on all of that, but then I buy into it of just going, okay, the soap opera nature of this, the ridiculousness of it, that's part of that ridiculous. The retconning, the Brian not being around, the everyone's related kind of thing. Like, that's what I meant in my spoiler free stuff where I cheer, maybe not the Brian stuff. I'm not cheering for, like, Brian's not here. Yeah. I'm not doing
Wow.
that, but like, no, I don't mean
No, I
like, I
know.
just mean the character. Like, I am going, yeah, it doesn't really make sense that the character's not around, even if he wants to protect his kids. It doesn't make sense that Dante wouldn't be going after him. It
It
doesn't
might
make
make a
sense
little
that
more
he,
sense though if Maya wasn't a part of this story as well, but
yes,
because
yeah,
Maya's there, you're constantly thinking about that a little bit more. Where it's like, okay,
yeah.
well, I think, and it's cool
Which
that
for a while,
Jordana
Jordana
Brewster is
Brewster
still
wasn't there, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's great that like because Vin Diesel's the mastermind behind all these movies. Let's be real. It's cool
Oh
that
yeah.
like she's still a part of the family and like they're bringing her in and she's she's working and stuff like that. But at the same time, I think it would maybe be a little bit more believable if you just got rid of that side of the family completely. But because she's still an integral part of this
Comes back,
story,
yeah.
you're more kind of self-aware of that aspect of the narrative, and you're kind of thinking to yourself, yeah, like Brian in those movies has always been someone that's been very proactive, in the movies and in sort of the heists and the adventures. And you would think like, yeah, with someone like Dante coming into this narrative, he wouldn't hesitate to sort of threaten Brian as well on top of everybody else. So like
Mhm.
I think like there's no easy way to kind of get around it, obviously, but at the same time, it's harder to not think about because of that archival footage at the beginning of the movie and also Jordana Brewster being in the film, and you kind of question that stuff, but
Oh,
she's
absolutely.
not in it a lot, so you're at the same time like the main focus becomes this weird like late 80s early 90s like kids movie hangout film with your weird eccentric uncle
Weird,
movie,
right?
Uncle Jacob,
Yeah.
and it kind of feels almost like, Uncle Buck or Home Alone or something like that, and in this
It's
like serious action movie, but then you have like a kids film in it as well, so that's also very
it's
strange.
so weird. The tonal shifts are so strange because you're right. You have this like intense melodrama where I feel like Vin Diesel believes it's like the most important story ever told on film. And then you have this really wacky kids, you like you said, kids movie, like in the middle with like this a really bad kid actor and John Cena who's also a really bad kid actor, and it's such a tonal shift from that character in the last movie as well. And now he's goofy uncle and they're going canoeing, but the canoeing's really like a fucking rocket, and it's just like it's so weird. And then you have the intentional kind of cringe comedy um with like Ludacris and
Yeah, with
Tyrese and stuff
Roman,
that like
Ramsey, and Tej, right? So
yeah. And you just so that's like the intentional comedy stuff, which is also a different tone than the kids movie tone, which is a different tone than the melodrama. So it's like it's the only movie or franchise that can kind of, it doesn't balance any of those things very well, but weirdly you just, again, you're in at this point and you kind of want that. Like even though I'm thinking the John Cena stuff with the kid is like awful, I'm kind of like, yep, this is where we are. Like I don't know how we got here, but sure, why not? A goofy uncle that was trying to murder his dad like last movie is like, all right, cool. Um and then I guess that goes to my other point where you have everyone kind of separated in this movie, which they do a lot in franchises every once in a while, but um, and that's, I guess, another problem that I had, even though I like still enjoyed the shit out of the movie. Like, I feel like certain characters just don't have like a ton to do. Um, and people show up, I feel like just for setup for other movies. You have, um, fucking
well
Shaw
you
show
meant
up at one point, and then,
yeah, you mentioned,
go ahead.
there are scenes that, like, okay, so you have the globe trotting aspect, the kind of the sequence that takes place in Rio de Janeiro at the beginning. They go back to that at one point. You have Roman, Ramsey, and Tej, and Han, kind of all splitting off afterwards and heading to London. And then you have Michelle Rodriguez's character Letty, who's been captured by Italian authorities and then brought to like an unmarked prison, which that title made me laugh quite a bit.
Antarctica.
Uh,
So
but like
I
like
laughed too.
like it's called like a Black Ops prison base or something like that. And just like
Yeah,
that title is very funny.
Antarctica.
Yeah. And so, some of these characters aren't strong enough to support themselves as like smaller groups. You need them to kind of be together in order for the
You
camaraderie to
want the
kind of
family to be
work.
together, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you have, Roman and Tej bickering back and forth, most of that does not work, even though I think Han within that group helps it out a little bit because he is just so
Yeah.
calm, cool, and collected that it kind of, it at least balances some of that stuff out a little bit more than in previous movies where it's like, okay guys, we get it, like this is, these are our comedic characters and what have you, but it does get a little
And they
bit
just do the same thing
obnoxious.
every movie, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and to your point with Sung Kang as Han, like at least he is the driving force in that group that you want to continue. No offense to Tej and Roman, they're fine. Like again, I like them more in the ensemble rather when they're off on their own. But even like the really awful sequence with Pete Davidson, where
Oh.
it's not funny at all. It's like another. I'm like, why do we need Pete Davidson and everything? Um, but then you have Han like knowingly eating the laced muffin, which I just like because his thing is always eating something, and I like he's so cool that he just does not give a shit that these are laced with LSD or whatever like that, and he just
Even
calmly
his trip
is
out
eating the
though
thing.
is
Although then, yeah,
because I think that is also a strong like if there is character development, or if there is sort of a trait of these characters. What I like about that is that usually, that kind of comedy, and anybody else would be having like a literal freak out. He's just like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, let's do it. And that works because,
I want to
one,
be a little stoned. Yeah.
but it's also funny, not because of the horrible graphics or the effects that they use, but it's funny because Han is so relaxed in general that, like, when it's happening, it's like, yeah, you don't need to make this a bigger deal than just be like, it's happening, and being very
Yeah.
nonchalant about the whole thing. And that works. But like the Pete Davidson stuff is like, it reminds you of with Hobbs and Shaw, where, they were bringing in people like Ryan Reynolds and Kevin Hart, and having these cameos that don't necessarily fit into, the film in any real meaningful manner in terms of, helping move the plot along, or bringing in a character that will, inspire some additional interest. It's just like, oh, look at The Rock's famous friends coming in to cameo for a scene, and, really yuck it up,
Yeah.
and they're not that funny. And, I mean, I think Kevin Hart and Ryan Reynolds, even though I'm not really a fan of them either, are funnier than Pete Davidson, who's just kind of one of those guys that it's always like a big kind of like question mark in terms of, like, I don't understand his appeal, even though I appreciate, his very kind of transparent sort of conversations about mental health and things like that. But, you're watching
Totally.
that scene and you're kind of like, well, this could have been cut. This is a scene that doesn't need to be added into the movie, and it's so self-indulgent. And, there are tons of movies that feel more structured when it comes to the whole breaking off of smaller teams. I mean, you watched Lord of the Rings, not too long ago. Like, a big part of that story is dividing and conquering with multiple characters, right, over the course of, a couple of years, as they kind of make their final destination. Where you're watching this, and part of it feels like, okay, how much of this is due to COVID, breaking off these smaller groups and having these actors work
Interesting. Yeah.
together. And then also, how much of this is because of the behind the scenes turmoil with Justin Lin leaving and Louis Leterrier coming in, because Michelle Rodriguez even talked about it when she was doing the Dungeons and Dragons press junket and tour for that film, where she said the fight scene that that she and Charlize Theron have together wasn't directed by anybody. It was just like a second unit and them, shooting the scene.
But that's usually what a second unit does, is shooting action
N-
sequences
no, but
sometimes,
but there
right?
was
Like,
but there wasn't a film at that point. And you can go and it's an article in Variety, and she talks about like having there was no filmmaker there. Like, there was nobody to oversee it. It was literally Theron and Rodriguez directing the scene. And so that's another thing where I don't want to be
interesting.
completely critical of Louis Leterrier either with this, because it does feel like it is such a generic action movie in a lot of ways. And Leterrier's a journeyman director, and overall. But I feel like you could probably see some stuff that's like, oh, well, he's worked with Jason Statham before in the Transporter movies. But there is something about this one that does feel run of the mill almost, with the action, where it's just going through the paces for the most part. And I think that's because Justin Lin left. I'm not saying that Justin Lin, if he had stayed, it would have been any better, but it does feel like Lin has brought something to the franchise, even with Tokyo Drift when he came aboard to direct that. And, you can see his contributions throughout this franchise, where watching this movie, it kind of just feels like it's on autopilot for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, sure. When you bring in a guy partway through filming, like I feel like you did a serviceable job. I feel like to me at that point, it's Vin Diesel's movie, and you could bring in anyone, and he's the guy in charge. So it's like whatever he says goes. And I feel like it was going to be the same movie no matter what. And I feel like maybe Justin Lin, much like The Rock at a point, just didn't want to deal with that anymore. But who knows? I agree with you that action is serviceable but forgettable, like I mentioned earlier. Quickly, what I want to bring up, yeah, we brought up how everyone is kind of separated. I felt like a lot of people didn't have a ton to do. Like having Letty and Cypher together, like it's just all of it felt kind of like nothing to me. Like again, with it's getting to people to certain places, the kind of misleading and stuff like that, where with this franchise, if you don't literally see a person explode on screen or get decapitated or something like that, like
Even
they are
then,
coming back. So it's just like, and even then we I wouldn't put it past them. So like having Tej and Roman and that group kind of explode in the ship at the end, and having things like that. Like I just felt like it was a lot of setup, and having Giselle show up to help Cypher and Letty. You're just like, you love it because it's ridiculous, but it's just like it felt like it took a long time to get there. And this movie very much is, Dom and Dante. And then you just kind of have people around them, like the new additions of like Brie Larson, which we mentioned is Mr. Nobody's daughter. Ridiculous, sure, why not? Felt kind of unnecessary. I missed Kurt Russell. We had Daniela Melchior come in as the sister of Elena, which is ridiculous. And like
there's an
I just
amazing
love
scene
like I, I
where
knew I knew you from the minute that I saw your face. You're like,
and
it's
her
so
and her
dumb.
character being like, I've got a file on Dante that my sister kept. And the way that
Yeah,
that
of
shot
course
as
you
well,
do. Of
the
course you
way
do.
that that shot, it does look very like soap opera-esque or melodramatic in that kind of like lighting where like it's very serious, but the delivery of it is kind of very stagey and arch in its performances. And yeah, like it's interesting as well because you have Vin Diesel, Daniela Melchior, and Pete Davidson, all of which were in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And so, from them to jump from one thing to another, and obviously,
Who was the
both all
third one?
three.
Sorry.
Pete Davidson. So Pete Davidson has a small role in Guardians
Yeah, but
3. Apparently,
yeah, I know
Daniela
that. And then you
Melchior
have
and Vin
Daniela
Diesel.
Mel, and then who?
Yeah, and Vin Diesel.
Oh, Vin Diesel. Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
stupid. Yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah. And
Um,
so with those three, it's just kind of funny thinking about like, okay, you go from one franchise to another, and that kind of does feel almost algorithmic in its casting, where it's like you're just bringing in people that
sure.
have worked that are either popular in the moment or have worked with this other person before in some capacity. And I really liked Daniela Melchior from the Suicide Squad. I think as Ratcatcher 2, she was really good. This and
I agree.
Marlowe, which was that horrible Liam Neeson adaptation from earlier this year, aren't doing her
Oh, I didn't see
any
her. Yeah.
favors. So, but yeah, it's just
I
interesting
think
where
she's
like
fine in this, but like
there's too many people. There's too many people. Like even Alan Ritchson, who was Jack Reacher on the show, and
yeah,
also
Ritchson. Yeah.
Raphael in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, the Michael Bay produced ones, the Platinum Dune movies. He's
Oh, I didn't
actually
know that.
he's kind of fun in his role, especially when you have him in this weird almost like control center when you're introduced to him and Brie Larson's characters, and he talks about like the family kind of being this cult, and in a weird way it is. And like there's that one line where it's like the fallout will be existential, that's actually very funny.
Yeah.
And that's the one time where
Yeah.
that
He's kind of like
self-aware
the
quality
Hobbs
is
role in
there.
this, right?
Yeah, yeah, and you can see that as
Yeah.
well because he's this big imposing guy who, the way that they're sort of structuring his character arc is that he's going to be, against, Vin and the fam until he's not. And then he, even the scene on the bridge when they get back to that, it's like that's when he turns to be a good guy for a minute. And that's very similar to when, The Rock begins to see the light, so to speak. So, like they're
But
they're 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 treading on familiar turf in a lot of ways.
but then the Saw-esque jigsaw reveal of him at the end, just
Da
like all
da
I can
da
hear is the
da da da.
dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, and the way that it even flashes back and he just like steps into frame, it's incredible. It's just like a retcon of a retcon is is what this franchise is, and I think is the perfect summation of everything that we get. And it's just, I want more of it. Like, I want a movie, the third movie from now, to go to another movie and show just off frame there was this, where whatever. And then the other one, you have Rita Moreno, who we forgot to mention too, who shows up as Abuleta Toretto, and it's just like incredible. And then you have
Yeah,
like
she's
people like
just there to
Statham, who
break
shows up as
bread,
Deckard Shaw, and then
basically. So
yeah, yeah, it
yeah,
doesn't. It's unnecessary, but hey, at this point, Rita Moreno in Fast and Furious, like that's just the headline
Helen
itself.
Mirren,
So,
Jason Statham,
yeah,
all
it's
your
all set
favorites
up,
are here.
and I said to you that if we were mad at Dune, we should probably be mad at Fast 10, because it really leaves you on, with only one third of a movie or half a movie, however we want to view it at the end of this. And I've thought about that more, because I leaned down to you and said that to a couple other people. And I said, would we be hypocrites if I say, but I'm like, you know what? This is a soap opera. They've embraced the soap opera, where I'm like, the ending is a soap opera ending. It's Days of Our Lives. It's any bullshit that's on daytime TV, where at the end of the episode, it's like some crazy thing that's happening, and it's a freeze frame on someone's fucking face. I literally went, fuck off. Like, when it like went to black, and I thought that was going to be the end of the movie, and then there's one more scene, which they should have just ended it on the one before. But it's it's just so absurd and so silly, and it doesn't really have an ending, but it is weirdly like sort of a full story, but then it ends on this ridiculous soap opera ending, where you can't help but, like, again, go out one side and just be like, you know what? I'm back in. Do give me the most ridiculous cliffhanger endings that I now have to wait 2 years for. Um, and I'm sure you're just making this shit up as you go, but I'm here for it. So, yeah, like, you have the reveals of, like I said, the crash. You have John Cena sacrificing himself, dude, when he flips upside down in slow motion, just sacrifice himself. I almost pissed myself. I was
And
laughing so
he
hard.
he grabs
Um,
his necklace, his cross necklace. Is like, oh.
like, it's so a character that you haven't really earned that from, right? Like, he was the villain in the last movie. He redeemed himself a little bit at the end. And then this movie, you have this, yeah, Uncle Buck kind of
Uncle
storyline
Jacob.
with him, and then he sacrifices yeah. And then he sacrifices himself, and he's probably not dead. And
You can't kill John
he'll
Cena. You can't kill anybody. That's the other thing that makes Dante not as threatening as a villain, is that
yeah.
none of these bad guys can ever successfully kill any of the family members, because you know that the writers and Vin Diesel, the true God's eye of these films, is going to bring them back, and so there's no real suspense or threat there, really. You just kind of have to enjoy how over the top Jason Momoa is, and not necessarily be like, oh, I'm worried about these main characters now being picked off by Dante, because he really is like the big bad of this entire franchise. You never feel that way. Like, you when you see John Cena sacrifice himself, yeah, you're like, oh, he'll be back in 2 or 3 or whatever, or like Kurt Russell not being around, he'll pop up again. Death means nothing. Like, it's like a superhero movie. It
Right,
really
because did
does
they kill
mean
Kurt Russell
nothing.
off? I forget.
Well, they alluded to that Cena might have killed him, and then with like
Right.
Han, even, right, with Deckard, with Jason Statham's character, it's like and Letty dying as well in 4, and then having amnesia and coming back as a villain. So like, none of that stuff makes any sense, but it's also, it takes you out of the movie in that you don't worry about any of these people. They're all going to be fine. They're all fine. Everybody is good. You're here to hang out with family, have some barbecues, listen to some Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, which is, I think, one of the other funny things, is that learning in this universe, Mark Wahlberg exists. And it seems to be an ongoing joke with John Cena, because it's also it was also referenced in Trainwreck when he's on a date with
Yeah.
Amy Schumer, and the one guy's like, "Oh, he looks like if Mark Wahlberg ate Mark Wahlberg," you know. So like stuff like that, like none of it is. There's no consequences to any of the actions. Fatalism is not real in these movies. There's more of a threat in Marvel films, I think, than there is in anything else. And yeah, John Cena is bad in this, and it's unfortunate because he was so good in Peacemaker, and it's like, oh, like maybe he learns something from that experience and he'll bring a little bit more to Jacob. But yeah, it just kind of feels like, okay, we're redeeming this character way too quickly because we've got to get to this point by the end of the narrative and sacrifice him and have it be meaningful. And so when you're watching these characters interact with each other and evolve, like even Roman wanting to be a leader and taking responsibility for, the botched operation that he put everybody through, like it doesn't really have any true meaning. The only stuff that's funny and amazing is Vin Diesel talking to Little B, and it's like, you gotta find the line, you gotta feel the car, and you gotta fly. And you're just like, no
When they show it, the
father
reveal is maybe he was
ever
driving the
talks
car.
like this. Ever.
It's so
It's
funny.
amazing. It's amazing.
It's amazing. So, anyways, 5 out of 5, perfect film. I love it dearly. No, if I'm being serious, it's so hard to even give this movie like a star rating. I think it's so subjective. If you're in, you're in. Like in my heart, is it 5 stars? Yeah, because I fucking loved every second about it. Um, like objectively, is it a good movie? No. So then you fall somewhere in the middle where I'm still gonna be pretty generous where I still enjoyed the hell out of the movie. I had little problems of how they separated people. Some of the action sequences just feels like it's in a blender and shot out the other side, and it's the same thing as the last 4 movies. And some of the comedy doesn't work. Some of the unintentional comedy is some of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. So like it's all over the place. But Dante is one of the most memorable characters in franchise history, in this franchise's history. Um, and I think Jason Momoa does such an amazing job. I just enjoyed uh, the absolute hell out of this. I like that they find a way of adding street racing back into every single movie. Like there's the staples that you want from a Fast and Furious movie of like a ridiculous action scene, a street racing scene, character returns, character deaths. It's just all so silly, and I love it so much. So I'm gonna give the movie a 4, which is being very generous, but I think that's just because I just enjoy the shit out of these movies, and I'm not ashamed to say that.
And that's fine. I think like if you gave this movie 1 star or 5 stars or anywhere in between,
You're right either
you,
way.
yeah, I mean it is all subjective, but I think with something like this, it can just be, it can, the rating can be just across the board. You can give it whatever you want, and it would still be a valid criticism or response to what this movie is. Because again, if you're getting into this for the love of Corona, for the love of barbecues, the love of these characters that we've come to know and enjoy time, spending time with, then hey, you know what, like that's what you're getting. Even though the separation of it does work against it a little bit, but you know, if it's part one of 3 movies that's supposed to be an end cap, or why not? But then at the same time, if you're looking from it from the perspective of, okay, well, what is this doing in terms of playing within the action genre, and is this adding anything new or interesting? It doesn't have to be reinventing the wheel. It can just be fun, and I didn't find any of the action fun, and I found it to be a bit of a slog. And the other thing that I really didn't mention that I think is a problem with this movie in particular, and some of the other ones, it looks ugly at times. It really looks like a lot of augmented post production and kind of washed out or faded blue screen that's kind of been shot, in and around locations. And when you see certain shots, it does look like, somebody
All
was
part
in
of
a
the charm,
studio.
baby.
But I think that kind of works against it when you do have some of these beautiful locations that are shot in camera, and then you look at, like, within the same sequence, this gorgeous, historical monument in Rome, and then it cuts to, you know, someone popping outside of a tank, and the horizon line just looking
Yeah.
so awful with like the blending of the light. It just it's terrible. It's ugly looking. So I'm giving it a 2. And it is, I think, one of the worst films in the franchise, but that's also because Fast 5 is one of the best. And you're reminded of that constantly, of how good a movie that is. And does not live up to Fast 5 in any way, with the exception of Jason Momoa having so much fun and winning you over. And he's one of those guys where it's like, yeah, he's been put in a lot of heroic roles, but between this and another movie that's not very good, but he's actually a lot of fun in, which is Bullet to the Head, the Sylvester Stallone movie, where he kind of plays a villain similar, where he's very charismatic and kind of likable, even though he's a sociopath. Um, you kind of think that, like, oh, maybe he should do this kind of stuff like Dave Bautista is, where he plays against, the type that he's been sort of portrayed as, or marketed as, because I think he's more interesting as a flamboyant but charismatic villain than he is a good guy. Even the Bad
Yeah.
Batch, he's more interesting because he's an anti-hero, but he's still, a villain to a certain degree. And that's kind of like the reverse version of like someone like Rucker Hauer, who in, after Blade Runner was always cast as the villain, but then every once in a while you'd get a Blind Fury or Wanted Dead or Alive, and then he would play a good guy. And his
Mhm.
good guy was weirder, because it was kind of like, are you a good guy? You are a good guy, but you're weird for a good guy, and that's interesting, you know.
I agree. I mean,
Um,
even like with his, on Game of Thrones, he played a bad guy, right? Like,
yeah,
so I think like, and then after the the break, like, I mean, he did stuff before Game of Thrones, obviously, but that kind
yeah, he
of
was in
breakout
Stargate
from there,
SG-1, and yeah.
yeah, that breakout there, then he started getting, those hero kind of roles. And I'm totally with you. Like, I want more of this from him. Like, he is so charismatic, but I think he can use that charisma in a way, like in this movie, where you're playing something not even against type, but like something a little weirder, or more of a villain role, or just something more than your kind of typical hero. He's put in that Aquaman box now too, right? And you're hoping, whatever they do with him after the next one. But I think he's great in this. And he is the standout thing. Like, again, I give the movie a 4. Am I really gonna, you know, I, I'm sure in years' time, when this franchise is finally sunset, like, am I going to go back and go, fuck, which one was that? Yeah, probably. But that's, again, part of the charm. It's just the Fast saga now. At this point, they're all the same thing. It's just chapters of a long soap opera. So I'm here for it. Eric, I had fun doing this. This was a blast. I'm so glad to be back doing this. So thank you for being patient with me, and thanks for holding down the fart while I was gone. Um, please go check out those interviews Eric did over on Untitled Movie Podcast, and that will be the channel where Eric and I get back and just talk about life and movies and things like that. So we will have a new episode probably early next week, that Eric and I will record this weekend or sometime soon. I will talk about, again, if you're probably not new to this show at this point if you listen to us for an hour about Fast and Furious, or maybe you are, but I took some time off the last couple months, and I will talk about that because I like sharing, and it's part of my therapy. Essentially, is just like I like getting it out and telling you guys, for people who are so generous to listen to us, of why I had to take a couple months off. But I'm excited to be excited about movies again, even if they are as silly as Fast X, or a nice Canadian gem in Blackberry, or part of my favorite stupid franchise like the MCU. So those movies have slowly gotten me back into being excited for movies again, and I'm starting to look on the calendar. Okay, Spider-Verse is coming up. Okay, XYZ is coming up. Like, I'm excited for the summer movie season, and those few movies got me there. So we'll be back soon with new episodes of the Untitled Movie Podcast. We'll have reviews up. I would love to talk about Blackberry. I think it was a blast. I would love to talk about Guardians. We'll see. No promises on anything. We're going to try to keep up with the new releases, but if we have the energy and the time, we'll go back and do some of those things that we missed. Um, and like I said, we'll probably hear about the other movies that I didn't see during my time off on the main show. I'm sure I'll talk about when I finally see Beau is Afraid and Dungeons and Dragons and Tetris and Super Mario Brothers. We haven't really even talked about because uh, I've been off. So things like that. So I'm excited to kind of talk about all that stuff. So, anyways, I'm rambling at this point. Thank you all for listening. You can follow me on all those social medias. Twitter is still around, so I'm still there at Matt Rohrbeck and all those other ones.
And I'm Eric Marchin. As Matt said, there's a few interviews with Ari Aster for Beau is Afraid, Matt Johnson for Blackberry, which there's some Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle talk in there. You have Matt Ruskin for Boston Strangler, and most recently Sean Gunn for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And yeah, it was really nice of you, Matt, to continue to, post them and make the graphics and everything. And yeah, just it's fun getting to talk to other people about movies and about what they've made, but it's also, having done this, it was, it had been a while. It was just a really nice reminder of how fun talking about movies is with you. And I really hope that, we now go at a pace that feels like it's not going to exhaust either one of us, and that we just enjoy it for what it is.
Yeah.
We're demanding of ourselves because we want to do the best job we possibly can, but there's a difference between perfection and just also enjoyment. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing and feeling like, overwhelmed by everything, sometimes you need to stop and really work on yourself and take a break. And it's hard to do that in this space because everything is about instant gratification and getting something up as soon as possible, and always kind of turning the wheel and moving to the next thing. So it can be hard to kind of get away from that or pull yourself away from it. And I applaud you for being so open and honest, but also just taking time for yourself, because I think that that's really, really important.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone sending me, well wishes and things on social. I'm never fishing for that kind of stuff. It just helps me when I'm open on things. I'm very open with my family and friends personally, but also I've made a lot of friendships online and through the show. And I know people have asked about me, and I've just kind of disappeared for a couple months. So, but I'm doing all right. I'm gonna play some Zelda. I'm gonna chill. I'm gonna watch some movies. It's gonna be a good time. So I can't wait to talk more. So I appreciate
2-4 weekend,
everything
baby.
you do. Oh yeah, we're just what better way to make our comeback than a Friday night on a long weekend where no one will pay attention. So it's just, at least in the US, it's not a holiday, but it's like the worst time to dump news. It's why the Toronto Maple Leafs let go of their general manager today, and they're just like, you know what, bad news. Friday before a long weekend, no one's paying attention. Just put it there. Matt and Eric were like, what better time to, after months of not podcasting, to put up a new review of a movie. But it'll be up here. You're already listening to this. All right, thanks everyone. Bye. See you next time.